Hello, everyone. We are in the third paper on the track 3 today. The topic, this paper is coming from Intel, and the topic is related to formal verification. It's never too late with formal. Stepwise guide for applying formal verification in post-silicon phase to avoid respins. Coming from authors Anshul, Aarti, Achutha, uh, Bindumadhava, Shivakumar, and Gadey from Intel. The floor is yours, guys. We'll revisit the questions after your session is done.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Aarti and I are honored to present our work on behalf of Kiran, Bindumadhava, Shiva, and Siva from Intel Corporation. In today's presentation, we would like to share the work we are doing to leverage formal verification in root-causing post-silicon bugs, evaluating workarounds through exhaustive list of scenarios to mitigate the risk, and provide high-confidence bug fixes to avoid respins. Though the industry is embracing formal verification across breadth of designs, its usage is limited by multiple factors, such as lack of expertise, complexity of the design, etc. Hence, majority of the designs are still dependent on traditional dynamic simulation for functional sign-off. Since dynamic simulation depends on the test stimuli, some inconsistencies may fall through the crack and make their way into the silicon due to inexhaustive coverage, resulting in post-silicon bugs, especially when the designs are getting more feature-rich and complex, as well as the time to market window is shrinking. Post-silicon bugs usually require a quick and accurate root cause analysis for a high-quality sign-off on the bug fixes. Traditionally, dynamic simulation has been the go-to methodology for post-silicon debugs using existing environments with a belief that it would offer a quick turnaround for the resolution. Formal verification usually not considered for the post-silicon bug reproduction, mainly because of three major facts and beliefs about post-silicon bugs in light of formal verification. It is a fact that post-silicon issues are isolated on huge block boundaries. Therefore, the belief that formal verification will not be manageable at such big design blocks. It is also a fact that formal verification is usually not run on such large boundaries during pre-silicon phase. Therefore, stable environments are not readily available for reuse. And it is right to believe that it will take unreasonably long time to bring up the formal environment from scratch at this level. And last one, not all signals can be probed during post-silicon verification. Only a general high-level behavior leading to the failure is observed. However, formal verification would need intricate signal level details for the bug reproduction. All these beliefs are not totally unfounded, and admittedly, like any other verification methodology, formal verification has its own limitation. However, these are not enough to limit application of this methodology that has changed the landscape of pre-silicon verification drastically. On a verification stage, there is a final quality filter before the product is released to the customer. However challenging, we believe that inclusion of formal verification in post-silicon debug is crucial and can shorten the debug cycle and thereby the time to market, while having the 100% confidence on the quality of fixes if applied in an intelligent approach. Through all these years, we have come up with a methodology, we call it Unearth, with stellar track record in applying formal verification effectively and accurately in post-silicon phase for success. This is a seven-step process that we follow to quickly build formal verification environment capable of root causing, validating workarounds, and validating the bug fixes. We start with understanding the problem, what kind of failure has happened, and collect all the collateral related to it. Then we try to nail down the formal property which could be which could flag this post-silicon bug. Then we try to etch the design boundary on which we have to start the formal search and assess the reachability of the source of the bug using some cover properties. Then we go ahead and regulate the constraints to strike a balance between over constraints and under constraints, and also tap the details that we get from the simulation wave to start the formal search. With all these work done, finally we move to harness the full potential of the formal technology in making sure no other bug is lurking around. We'll go about this approach one by one. So in the first step, we start from collecting all the essential details about the post-silicon design issue. Such details are instrumental in getting the head start in the right direction. These details will also be helpful during each step of the execution in the overall quest of finding the root cause of the post-silicon issue. Each post-silicon issue comes with its own panic and paranoia. Hence, it is common to have multiple descriptions of the issue from various stakeholders, both design and validation side. It is important to document all such descriptions and extract vital information such as what was the effect of failure? Was that a data corruption bug? Did it create a deadlock? Then what was the sequence of events at different design interfaces? For example, did we receive a dependent read request on an address on which the partial write request was already pending? Or did we get a CRC error in a retry message causing multiple iterations? Or did we get a non-posted message interleaved with a posted message when the buffer was almost full? Then we go ahead to collect relevant specification and implementation document to understand microarchitectural details of the design, such as primary or auxiliary interfaces, mode of operation, flow of transaction, flow of execution, etc. We need to make sure that we source the design files from the version of the repository which made it to the silicon. It is a common pitfall to start reproducing the post-silicon issue using design files from the top of the trunk. We also need to assess the information dump from the post-silicon test failure, such as the values of the configuration register, error logging registers, debug hook, etc. Sometimes particular manifestation of post-silicon issue might be reproduced in dynamic simulation while the formal verification environment is still in works. The simulation waveform will help visualizing the issue better. Now, finding a bug manifestation in simulation should not call off this formal verification effort because there could be more scenarios of bug manifestation that simulation has not found yet. Though the design documentation would generally include timing diagrams, however, sample simulation waveforms from directed tests proves to be helpful while debugging failures seen in the formal environment. Sample waveform can also be used to brainstorm some of the over constraint to bypass formal complexity. We need to locate all the existing formal verification collateral available. It could be a very basic environment to bring up the design files in a formal tool or an assertion-based formal verification IP on a standard interface, or even a full-fledged formal sign-off environment. Once the manifestation and the scenario of the failure are well understood, shift the focus to thinking about the properties of the design that would be violated in the post-silicon failure. Start the process by brainstorming general properties such as each request from the host should be acknowledged by the device eventually, or device should send the response in the same order as the requests were received from the host. And then move towards more specific properties such as buffer should never become full and should always have one entry available for the pointer management, or something like a dispatcher should not preempt a request more than n times. Depending on the type of the failure and the level of details we have gathered so far, we can come up with multiple such properties that are worth checking. Write all such properties in plain, simple, human readable language without worrying about the implementation details. Once we have the succinct definition of any property, we can engage with the microarchitects to identify the observation points for the property and implement it using lightweight instrumentation code in SVA. For example, in this slide, we are depicting a register data corruption, which is being identified between channel and the main band endpoint. Now, one of the possible reason of a data corruption is the data is getting overwritten. Now, if you see on the left, the main band endpoint sends a request and a dummy response, and the bridge has to send or fill the dummy response with an actual response and send it back to the main band. Here, we can tap this interface to model the sequence of events here, saying the request would happen first, then a dummy response, and then the actual response, and model this interaction of the interface at the interface in a small FSM-based reference model and ensure that there are no spurious responses which could overwrite the data and cause a data corruption bug. Now, post-silicon issues are mostly isolated at system level boundaries such as memory controller, physical layer, L2 cache, etc. Bringing up even a basic formal property verification environment at such subsystem would typically need weeks of effort and many complexity resolution techniques to reach formal sign-off. Therefore, we need a better approach in selecting the design under test for locating the source of the bug than selecting the entire subsystem as our duty. Apart from general recommendation of selecting a design scope with minimal area for minimizing formal complexity, minimal parameter for minimizing constraint modeling, and standard interfaces. We also recommend picking a block boundary at which we have all the interface signals to observe the validity of a property brainstorm in the previous step. Assuming we have identified correct properties, this approach would yield counterexamples under three categories. Feedback from these counterexamples would guide us in selecting or expanding our design scope to root cause the post-silicon issue. Starting with a smaller design scope is safe because we are safe, we won't get any false proofs. And it is also manageable as we can increase the design scope by integrating the neighboring blocks in the DOT without remodeling the entire environment. Most of the post-silicon issues are extremely corner case that require some highly unlikely sequence of events happening in a specific order and proximity. Though formal technology is highly effective in finding such corner case because of its breadth-first exhaustive search of the state space, these corner case could be hard to reach due to formal complexity. Depending on the size of the design and the cone of influence of the formal property, we often run into situations where the formal tool gives up before reaching those states of the design where the property would not hold true. Such bad states could be deep in the state transition graph. One of the most effective way to guide bug hunting formal engines to reach such deep design state is to implement spot covers for the intermediate events for the manifestation of post-silicon issue and functional cover to witness the exact sequence of events that drove the design into bad state. We recommend using simple FSM to model sequence of events instead of complex SVAs. Another class of effective functional covers are the ones that generate witness for a particular warm state of the design at the time of failure. For example, an exact state of the linked list in terms of its head pointer, tail pointer, and node links, or an exact combination of multiple state machines. Covers not only help the formal engines to work more effectively, but they also help build confidence in the direction of our effort and provide an estimate of depth at which we would find the failure. Suppose we know the bug manifests only when an internal FSM transitions to a state, say, drain, after an internal linked list has been populated with a certain number of nodes, say n. Such covers enable the tool to use its SAT-based constrained random engines to generate witness traces for deep states quickly and reposition the locus of its bug hunting bounded model checking engines from reset states to interesting warm states. Keep the formal environment under Keeping the formal environment under constraint is a recommended approach to reach pre-silicon verification sign-off. However, both over constraints and under constraints play an important role in post-silicon formal verification effort. Since we would be running only a small set of properties to root cause the post-silicon issue, we do not need accurate constrained interfaces of the design. For example, if we suspect the design to be sending messages out of order, then we may not need to perfectly constrain the initialization interface, as a formal tool may figure out the correct initialization sequence to bring the design to a state where it can accept the messages and send them out on the output out of order. On the other hand, we can narrow down the formal search by constraining the configuration registers to values observed in the failing silicon test. This technique can be improvised by carefully scaling down some of the configuration registers values to bring the deep states closer to the reset states. For example, reducing the preemption threshold value to trigger preemption more often or block entries of a linked list to reach full state with lesser transaction. Formal search can be made more directed by disabling traffic on interfaces that is not expected to play any part in post-silicon scenario. We recommend the constraint strategy explained in this figure to reap the benefit of both under constraints and over constraint for a faster reproduction of the post-silicon issue. Over constraint will help narrow the scope of the formal tool search and allow the tool to spend focused effort on failing scenario, and under constraint will eliminate the chances of accidental masking of real design issues due to lack of stimuli. Bring up the DOT without any constraints, set up the clock and reset, and witness the logic is alive by running some basic sanity covers at the output of interest. Then over constrained non-participating interfaces such as scan, train, auxiliary channels, etc., and ensure the design is still able to toggle the outputs of interest. Switch back to under constraint approach of adding or refining the constraints based on the counterexample produced by formal for the target property. Some of the large design scopes may require long and specific sequences of standard events before it could process the functional traffic. Common example of such sequence are cold boot sequence, form reset sequence, credit initialization sequence, frequency sync sequence. Intra-silicon reset abstraction proved to be helpful in abstracting out such time-consuming, uninteresting sequences to start from the design set that can consume the functional traffic. However, reset abstraction may require certain refinement and can become an iterative process spanning over days and weeks of effort. In post-silicon phase, it is better to bypass long standard sequences more deterministically than reset abstraction. Here, simulation waves serve as an excellent starting point for formal search from a warm state. All we need to do is generate a simulation wave, identify the timestamp where the design comes to a stable state after all the boot, reset, initialization sequences, etc. Load the simulation wave informal tool and specify the timestamp of interest and start your formal proofs. While all these steps propose a fast path to root cause the post-silicon issue, they should be executed with a greater goal in mind. After root causing the post-silicon issue, same environment should be augmented to evaluate the workarounds, verify the bug fixes, and achieve formal sign-off. For example, in the figure on the slide, we started at the interface between the main band endpoint and the bridge, but then we enhanced the entire setup to include bridge as well as all the register endpoints as part of the DUT and construct a a comprehensive end-to-end formal verification environment to make sure that at least in this part of the design, we don't have any bugs left. After successful reproduction of post-silicon issue and all its possible manifestation, it is strongly advisable to employ bug hunting, abstraction models, proof acceleration techniques to explore more bugs in the neighboring logic. Formal verification environment developed in post-silicon phase for current version of the IPs or SoCs should be the collateral which can be reused to verify more features and updates that are coming in the future versions of the IPs and SoCs. With that, I will hand it over to Aarti, who will share a case study of applying this methodology on a post-silicon bug in scheduler. Over to you, Aarti. Thank you.
Thanks, Anshul, for detailing the post-silicon FE methodology. And let me take you all through one of the case study where we applied this methodology successfully and saw great results. So we saw one bug in post-silicon simulation, and after initial analysis, it looked to be coming from the scheduler block. This block had three major interfaces, X, Y, and Z. A transaction that was coming through interface X would go through a packet parser where some predefined transformations would take place. And then the transformed packet would go through some queues and control logic where some routing decisions will be made, and then the packet gets routed to either interface Y or Z. The routing decisions were dependent on the resource availability on the modules connected on interfaces Y and Z. Also, they were dependent on some internal rules, which also were dependent on configuration register values. The basic challenge for the formal verification of this block was its design size. It was about 4 million gates, which would pose challenges to the formal verification tools for convergence. To give you all an idea of what the bug was, there is a representative waveform of the bug scenario where we see there are 5 transactions A to E going on interface X. And based on the internal rules, let's suppose the transaction A goes to interface Y and the transaction B goes to interface Z. And then the next transaction that we see on either of these two interfaces is transaction D. And again, the transaction D comes on interface Y. So transaction C, what we see here in this diagram, is lost. And what actually was happening was that the transaction C got scheduled on interface Y, but its parameters were overwritten by transaction D, which was there in the pipeline, the new transaction in the pipeline. So this was the bug that we were trying to chase in formal verification environment, and we adopted the unearth flow for it. And as a first step, we gathered a lot of simulation traces and design specification, architectural specification. We studied them and created the basic flow diagram of the routing based on that understanding. As we see on the flow chart that we made on the right, there were 3 endpoints. A transaction coming on interface X can get routed to Y or Z based on a lot of decisions that were happening internally. In the interest of time, I would not go through the entire flow chart, but I would like to highlight this temporal loop in this flow chart, where based on some decisions, a transaction can get replayed in the pipeline, while a new transaction can be coming at the same time. And this was the source of the issue. After understanding the basic routing flow, we brainstormed on what properties can lead us to the failing scenario. And for that, first we pinpointed what are the relevant events in the flow chart. So we named the relevant events 1 to 6 as seen in the diagram on the slide. And then we thought that if we can prove the transactional order checking between the some sets of these events, that can help us reach the failing scenario. For example, if a transaction that is coming on event 2 should be coming in the same order as it reached event 1. Similarly, the transaction that is reaching the event 3 should be coming in the same order here as it was received at event 2. And so on, we got 4 property sets where 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 4 to 6, and 5 to 6, and we wrote these properties using formal scoreboards. Then after understanding the nature of the bug, we understood that the first property, that is the transactional order checking between 2 and 1 events, should be good enough for us to get to the bug. And so we concentrated on that property first and deprioritized the rest of the assertions. After understanding what we need to prove, we concentrated on how to prove, and as a first step, we tried to reduce the design scope. This was a big design, and we knew that it will pose verification challenges to the tools. So, and we understood that the bug resides in the routing logic, and so we did away with the packet transformation and configuration register setting logic, and we kept the design boundary as the red rectangle in the slide. And with that, we reduced the design size for the tool for the verification effort to just 1.5 million gates, which was very less compared to the initial 4 million gates. Yes, there were some design disadvantages that we had to model assumptions on the internal interfaces, which were non-standard interfaces. But what we saw was that advantages here were more than the disadvantages, and we went with this approach. And as a next step, we added a lot of covers in our formal verification environment to check the sanity of the environment and to see that if we are able to get some meaningful results, we are able to reach some valid states with this environment or not. And first, we added reachability covers on the relevant events we had determined previously, 1 to 6. And then we added a cover where we thought that we could reach the failing state directly through the cover. So we added a reachability cover of a state where a previous transaction is getting replayed and is getting conflicted with a new transaction coming in the pipeline. And we did see the bug getting manifested in the cover itself through this. Now, we had written a lot of assertions and cover, but to help the tool to reach those relevant states, we had to help it with some under constraints and over constraints to make its journey a little easier. So we added some under constraint. For example, we added some reset abstraction on critical resource counters so that the tool can play with those values and reach the corner case scenarios faster. We also added some over constraint. We fixed configuration register values. Mostly we matched it to the values seen in the post-silicon simulation dump. Also, we reduced the number of physical channels. So a transaction that is coming through interface X can actually come through many physical channels in the design. But for this bug reproduction, we just reduced allowed the physical channels to just 2, and that was good enough for reproducing the bug. Also, as step 6, we actually loaded our valid reset state from a simulation trace to expedite our initial efforts. Once our environment was stable, we removed this dependency and allowed a broader reset state by doing reset modeling using assumptions. As the last step of our approach, we harness the full potential of formal technology by adding more properties for full functionality check of the design. Also, we relaxed a lot of over constraints and allowed more configuration register values. So what we saw from this case study was that we could reproduce the post-silicon issue that we were chasing in just 4 weeks. And apart from the bug that we were trying to find, we also detected 3 other failing scenarios in the surrounding logic. With the assertions that we wrote, we helped in determining a robust fix by proving the absence of bug. Also, we verified 2 fixes and compared them functionality-wise and performance-wise. The FE setup that we had created for post-silicon FE debug was reused in next project as proactive FE. So the key takeaway that we take from this case study is that the design size is not a limiting factor in post-silicon FE. We saw here the design size was huge, but once we adopt this approach, we go in a planned manner, we see that it is a doable task. To summarize, we presented the unearth methodology, which we consider as a comprehensive guide for post-silicon FE. We saw impactful results in the case study that we shared. And apart from this case study, we had applied this methodology in several other designs and we saw similar results. Post-silicon FE is very important as it helps us identify more design candidates for FE sign-off, which we wouldn't have considered previously. Also, it helps us in targeting more bug-prone designs for next generation. And it motivates transition from reactive to proactive approach. That's why we recommend that all post-silicon issues in control logic should be reproduced through FE. Thank you for listening, and now we are open for questions.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. I think we have a few questions. First, to start with, is the unearth approach is a generic, methodical approach that you have listed is very suitable for doing any FE verification. I know you applied for post-silicon approach, but so have you basically, was there a thought process in see how it could have been done pre-silicon to even avoid running into the issue in the first place, right?
That's right. So it is, the limitation is that the design teams and people did not think about these sort of issues in the pre-silicon phase, and it went through to the verification phase without undergoing formal verification. However, just to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes again, what we have been driving at Intel is that as soon as you have a post-silicon issue detected located in a particular IP, you first take it, use the hindsight to build the post-silicon setup, and then for the next generation, or maybe even for the same generation if we have time, for the next before the next respin, build the pre-silicon environment for that. So we generally call it at Intel to be moving from a reactive formal, where doing formal was a reaction of a bug, but you move that reactive formal to proactive formal from the next generation onwards.
Understood. Yeah, thank you. You also mentioned that more control path related bugs you wanted to focus to this approach. Any specific reason, and you see applications for others?
Yeah, so the reason for generally for property verification, we don't go after data transform designs, because for that we have a separate methodology of doing data path verification in the team. So with formal property, this is only about formal property verification. That's why we are focusing on control logic, in the sense that if you want to write properties, they help you find out event-based issues or control passing related issues much easier. And if at all we see a post-silicon bug which is related to a data path, maybe for a ECC or something, and for that we adopt the methodology of data path verification.
Okay, and I think one question is on the effort involved in creating the 4-week effort. Was it mostly done in creating the models and the methodology of investigating? Basically, you are unearthing methodology, or yeah.
So I mean, we've perfected the methodology over many such activities. I think we've in last 11 months we have done this on 8 different IPs, and I've found more than 15 issues through that. So the methodology is not like 4 weeks effort. It took time. But yes, the case study that Aarti presented was starting from when we got to know about the bug or the issue in the post silicon till the point we actually were able to reproduce it and verify the fix for it and the workaround for it. So that was the 4 week effort that we. And so this is, so you can say it was understanding and building the setup to get to the goal is what 4 weeks effort was for.
Yeah. One final question is, being a guided approach, like a methodology that you have put on Earth, how easy for that to be propagated to other team members or other IP owners, etc. Right? So how much it is enforceable, basically, through enforcement?
So we have been, I think, the one data point is that this is working. I mean, with a short span of 1 year or so, it is already being adopted in 4 different teams in different orgs. So the interpretability of the methodology is very easy. What you have to take a structured approach, but at the same time, we would need some expert advice as well, time in there, because uh, formal is not something you can do in silos now. It is something which you have a lot of collaboration is required so that you can brainstorm a lot of ideas. So I mean, it is plain simple vanilla methodology which people can adopt if they can follow a particular discipline in planning out the activity.
Yeah, I think you stated it right. It's the methodology and that sticking to the plan, sticking to the structured plan. Yeah, thank you for your time, and it was good. Just one more question, actually. Can you shed more light on reset modeling using assumption that you used in place of reset trace for simulation?
Okay, so initially what we did was that just to make sure that we're starting from a good state in the sense, a stable state which is not illegal, we used a simulation waveform, took a timestamp and said, okay, initialize every flop in my design as you see in the simulation waveform at this timestamp. But again, this is good for doing the post silicon, with hindsight, you're trying to find a particular issue in the bug, in the design. But eventually you will have to remove that and start doing the modeling of the registers that you try to steal the values from simulation. One such is, I think one example we took in the methodology was the configuration registers. Generally, when you're doing functional verification or you're doing control logic, stressing on the control logic, you don't really need to see if the control registers are being written correctly or not. That can be a different activity in itself. So there we put the cut points and assign or let these configuration registers to be stable, and then we apply rules which are necessary for the design to work. For example, you cannot have maximum occupancy greater than the number of entries required, and so on and so forth. So this is the control register, configuration registers. For the rest of the things, we can actually it's again structured approach. Manage as allow as much as you can manage at one time. So for example, if you have registers which is holding on the number of credits, etc., so remove the, you can always pick if you want to pick all the register values from the simulation or some of them. So remove one register at a time or a bunch of register at a time, model it through constraints, and that is how you will be able to manage a whole lot of constraints that you require for full-fledged end-to-end verification.